He was the king of a corporate empire, a man whose name was etched onto skyscrapers. She was his everything, the woman who stood by him as he built it all. They had the perfect life, the perfect home, the perfect love story. But when they couldn't have the one thing they wanted most, a child, their perfect world began to crumble. He looked at his pregnant wife, the woman carrying their miracle baby, and uttered 6 words that would shatter her soul and ignite a legal firestorm. "You're not biologically enough for me." This is the story of how a millionaire's cruel words led to a mother's fierce fight, and how her lawyer made sure he would never see his child again. Esther Rossi moved through the grand foyer of her Fifth Avenue penthouse like a ghost. The cavernous space, usually a testament to her husband Ethan Caldwell's success, felt like a gilded cage. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, glinting off the polished marble floors and the ridiculously expensive modern art Ethan had insisted on buying at a recent Sotheby's auction. Each piece he'd declared was an investment, just like their life, their marriage, their future. But lately Esther felt more like a liability than an asset. Their love story had once been the stuff of New York fairy tales. She was a bright, ambitious art curator with a passion for discovering new talent. He was a self-made real estate mogul, a shark in a Tom Ford suit who had clawed his way to the top of the city's notoriously cutthroat property market. They'd met at a gallery opening in Chelsea, a whirlwind romance that saw them married within a year. Ethan had been utterly captivated by her spirit, her intelligence, her refusal to be impressed by his wealth. He'd loved that she saw him, not his bank balance. For 5 years, their life was a dizzying carousel of glamorous charity galas, exclusive dinner parties, and spontaneous weekend trips to their private villa in Tuscany. They were the golden couple, the envy of their social circle. Ethan was the power player, the man who could close a billion-dollar deal with a single phone call. Esther was his elegant, supportive wife, the one who humanized him, who softened his sharp edges. She was the one who remembered their friends' birthdays, who chose the perfect, thoughtful gifts, who made their sterile penthouse feel like a home. But beneath the glittering surface a hairline crack had appeared, and it was threatening to shatter their carefully constructed world. The source of their silent, creeping misery was their inability to conceive a child. It was a cruel irony that a man who could build empires from the ground up, who could bend the city's skyline to his will, couldn't create a life. They had tried everything. For 3 years, their lives had been dictated by ovulation cycles, hormone injections, and the cold clinical precision of fertility specialists. Esther's body had become a medical battleground, poked, prodded, and analyzed. She'd endured the bloating, the mood swings, the crushing disappointment of each negative pregnancy test, all with a quiet resilience that Ethan initially admired. He would hold her hand during the invasive procedure's murmur, words of encouragement, and promise her that they would get through it together. But as the months bled into years, a subtle shift occurred. Ethan's encouragement began to sound hollow, his patience wearing thin. The man who had once looked at her with unadulterated adoration now seemed to see her as a failed investment, a project that wasn't yielding the desired returns. He started spending longer hours at the office, his evenings filled with unavoidable client dinners. The hand-holding stopped, replaced by a chasm of silence that grew wider with each passing day. The decision to pursue in vitro fertilization (IVF) with a donor egg was a last resort, a final desperate roll of the dice. The doctor had gently explained that Esther's egg quality was the primary issue. The news had hit her like a physical blow, a confirmation of her deepest fear, that her body had betrayed her. She had wept in Ethan's arms, and for a fleeting moment, the old Ethan, the man she had fallen in love with, had resurfaced. He had held her tight, stroked her hair, and whispered, "It doesn't matter, Izzy. As long as you're the one carrying our baby, that's all that matters. It will be our child." They had selected a donor with painstaking care, a young woman with a similar Italian heritage to Esther's, a love for art, and a bright, infectious smile that shone through in her photograph. The process was grueling, both physically and emotionally, but when the doctor finally confirmed that Esther was pregnant, the joy that erupted between them was so pure, so potent, that it seemed to erase all the pain and heartache that had come before. Ethan was ecstatic. He'd popped open a bottle of vintage Cristal, a bottle he'd been saving for a truly momentous occasion. He'd swept Esther off her feet, spinning her around their vast living room, laughing with a genuine, unbridled happiness she hadn't seen in years. He'd showered her with gifts, a ridiculously extravagant diamond necklace from Harry Winston, a new custom-designed Birkin bag, a top-of-the-line electric car she didn't even want. He was treating her like a precious vessel, a Faberge egg that needed to be protected at all costs. But as the pregnancy progressed, a strange and unsettling change began to creep into Ethan's behavior. His initial elation curdled into a kind of obsessive oversight. He hired a private chef to control her diet, a personal trainer to monitor her gentle prenatal yoga, and a second chauffeur for the sole purpose of driving her to her doctor's appointments. He'd call her constantly not to ask how she was feeling, but to check if she'd eaten her prescribed quota of organic kale or taken her prenatal vitamins at the exact right time. The gifts, too, began to feel less like tokens of affection and more like transactions. It was as if he was paying for a service rewarding a successful surrogate. The joy in his eyes was replaced by a look of intense, almost clinical scrutiny. He would stare at her burgeoning belly with a strange mixture of pride and something else, something she couldn't quite decipher, something that made a cold knot of dread form in the pit of her stomach. Their conversations became increasingly stilted and superficial. He would talk endlessly about his latest business acquisition, his plans to expand his empire, his legacy. He spoke of the baby in the same proprietary way, as if the child was just another asset, the heir to the Caldwell fortune. He was already planning the trust fund, the private schools, the path the child's life would take. One evening, as they sat in their sterile white living room, Esther tried to bridge the growing chasm between them. "I was thinking," she began, her voice soft, tentative. "Maybe we could go away for a weekend, just the two of us. Before the baby comes, like we used to." Ethan didn't even look up from his iPad, where he was scrolling through stock market figures. "Can't, Izzy. I've got that big merger with the Chen Corporation. It's a critical time. It's always a critical time, Ethan," she said, a hint of desperation creeping into her voice. "I miss you. I miss us." He finally looked at her, his expression a mixture of irritation and impatience. "What are you talking about? I'm right here. I've given you everything you could possibly want. This baby. I've made this happen for us." The way he said it, "I've made this happen," as if she were merely a passive participant in the creation of their child, sent a chill down her spine. The word us felt like a lie. There was no us anymore. There was Ethan, and there was the vessel carrying his heir. The dread that had been simmering beneath the surface began to boil over. She started noticing other small but significant things. He never touched her belly anymore. In the early days of the pregnancy, he would rest his hand on her stomach, a look of wonder on his face. Now he avoided it, as if he were afraid of what he might find. He stopped calling the baby our baby, instead referring to it as the baby, or more chillingly, my son. He had decided with unwavering certainty that the child was a boy. He'd already had the nursery decorated in shades of navy blue and grey, with a theme of vintage airplanes. He'd even had a miniature custom-made suit, a replica of his own, hung in the closet. Esther felt a growing sense of alienation, a profound and terrifying loneliness. She was a stranger in her own home, in her own marriage, in her own body. The baby, which should have been a symbol of their love and unity, had become the ultimate wedge driving them further and further apart. She tried to rationalize his behavior, telling herself it was just stress, the pressure of his work, the anxiety of impending fatherhood. But deep down, she knew it was something more, something uglier. The man she had married, the man who had seen her, had been replaced by a cold, calculating stranger who saw her as nothing more than a means to an end. The gilded cage had never felt so cold, so empty. And as she looked out at the glittering and indifferent city skyline, a terrifying thought took root in her mind. She had to get out. But how? How could she escape the man who controlled every aspect of her life? The man who was the father of her unborn child. The man who she was beginning to realize she didn't know at all. The fairy tale was over. The nightmare was just beginning. The breaking point came on a Tuesday, a day as grey and oppressive as the mood that had settled permanently over their penthouse. Esther was 6 months pregnant, and the initial glow had long since faded, replaced by a constant low-grade anxiety. Ethan had been particularly distant all week, barking orders at his staff over the phone, his face a thunderous mask of concentration. He was in the final stages of a hostile takeover of a rival real estate firm, and the stress had magnified his worst qualities, sharpening his temper to a razor's edge. Esther had spent the afternoon at a prenatal checkup. The doctor had been pleased with her progress, and for the first time in weeks, Esther had felt a flicker of genuine, unadulterated joy as she listened to the strong, steady thump of her baby's heartbeat. She'd bought a small, soft, gender-neutral stuffed animal on the way home, a little yellow duck. It was a small act of rebellion against Ethan's preordained vision of a son. She found him in his study, a cavernous room panelled in dark mahogany, a large, imposing desk at its center. He was staring out the window, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He didn't turn as she entered. "Ethan," she said, softly holding up the small paper bag. "I got something for the baby." He turned, then his eyes, which she had once found so captivating, were salt and hard as chips of ice. He glanced dismissively at the bag. "I've already had a custom-made rocking horse delivered from Germany. We don't need any more clutter." "It's just a little duck," she said, her voice faltering. The joy she had felt just an hour before evaporated, replaced by the familiar sting of his dismissal. "A duck," he repeated, his lip curling into a sneer. How quaint. "What's wrong, Ethan?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "You've been like this for weeks. It's more than just the merger, isn't it?" He took a long swallow of his drink, the silence stretching between them thick with unspoken resentment. "I've been thinking," he said finally, his voice dangerously low, "about this whole situation." What situation, she asked, though she knew with a sickening certainty what he meant. He gestured vaguely towards her belly. "This, the baby, the arrangement." "Arrangement," she echoed the word, a slap in the face. "This is not an arrangement, Ethan. This is our child. We went through so much to get here." He let out a short, bitter laugh that held no humor. "You went through it. I just paid for it." Esther recoiled, as if he had struck her. The cruelty of his words, the casual way he dismissed her physical and emotional ordeal, stole the air from her lungs. How can you say that, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I did this for us?" "Did you?" He shot back, his voice rising. He slammed his glass down on the desk, the sound echoing in the silent room. "Or did you do this for you, to trap me, to secure your position?" "Trap you?" she cried, her voice cracking with disbelief. "I love you. I wanted a family with you." "Love," he scoffed, advancing on her. "You loved the lifestyle, the money, the status. Don't insult my intelligence, Esther." She backed away, her hand instinctively going to her belly, a protective gesture. He was a stranger, a monster wearing her husband's face. "That's not true. You know that's not true." He stopped in front of her, his tall frame looming over her, his shadow falling across her. He looked down at her, his gaze sweeping over her pregnant form, with an expression of pure, unadulterated revulsion. And then he said the words, the 6 words that would detonate her world, the words that would echo in her nightmares for years to come. "You're not biologically enough for me." The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Esther stared at him, her mind struggling to process the sheer, breathtaking cruelty of his statement. It was a rejection, not just of her, but of the child. She carried the child they had supposedly created together. "What did you say?" she stammered, her heart pounding a frantic, painful rhythm against her ribs. His face was contorted with a rage that seemed to come from a place of deep, hidden bitterness. "You heard me. This baby, it's not really mine, is it? It's half you and half some anonymous woman we paid for. It's not a true Caldwell. It's not from my bloodline, my real bloodline." It was then that she finally understood. The strange behavior, the obsession with legacy, the coldness, the revulsion. It was never about stress or business. It was about his ego, his pathological pride, his obsession with his own perceived genetic superiority. He saw her and the child within her as a dilution of his precious DNA. He had used her, her body, her desperation to get what he wanted, and now he was discarding her because she wasn't pure enough for him. The shock gave way to a wave of white-hot fury. The tears stopped. Her spine straightened. The woman who had spent years tiptoeing around his moods, trying to appease him, vanished. In her place stood a woman, pushed to the absolute limit. "Get an out," she said, her voice low and shaking with rage. He looked momentarily surprised, as if he expected her to crumble to beg for his forgiveness. "This is my house, Esther. Get out," she repeated, her voice gaining strength. "Or I will scream this entire building down. I want you out of my sight, now." A flicker of something, perhaps fear, perhaps respect, crossed his face. He stared at her for a long moment, then turned on his heel and walked out of the study without another word. A few minutes later, she heard the front door slam shut. The silence that followed was absolute. Esther stood frozen in the middle of the room, her body trembling uncontrollably. The beautiful, expensive penthouse had become a mausoleum, a tomb for a dead marriage. The little yellow duck lay forgotten on the floor. She sank onto the plush carpet, a sob tearing from her throat, a raw animal sound of pure agony. She wept for her lost love, for her shattered dreams, for the child who would be born into this mess of lies and cruelty. She wept until she had no tears left, until she was hollowed out empty. And then in the depths of her despair, a new feeling began to take root. It was small at first, a tiny, fragile seedling, but it grew with surprising speed, pushing its way through the rubble of her broken heart. It was a feeling of fierce, primal protective rage. He would not do this to her. He would not do this to her child. He had called her not enough. She would show him just how much she was. Her mind, once clouded with grief, began to clear. She knew what she had to do. She couldn't fight a man like Ethan Caldwell alone. He had an army of lawyers, an empire at his command. She needed someone just as formidable, someone who could see through the polished facade to the rot beneath. She remembered a name whispered in hushed, reverent tones in her old social circle. Stella Martinez, a divorce lawyer known for her razor-sharp intellect, her take-no-prisoners approach, and her unwavering dedication to her clients. She was the lawyer you hired when you wanted to win, no matter the cost. They said she could smell a lie from a mile away, and that she had a network of investigators who could unearth secrets buried for decades. With trembling hands, Esther reached for her phone. She found the number for Martinez Law Group and dialed. A calm, professional voice answered on the other end. Martinez Law Group. How may I help you? Esther took a deep breath, the first steadying breath she had taken in hours. My name is Esther Caldwell, she said, her voice clear and firm, all traces of hysteria gone. I need to speak with Stella Martinez. It's an emergency. As she spoke, she looked at her reflection in the darkened window. She saw not a victim, but a survivor. A mother. A fighter. Ethan Caldwell had made the biggest mistake of his life. He had underestimated her. And with Stella Martinez by her side, she would make sure he would live to regret it. The battle for her child, for her future, had just begun. The offices of Martinez Law Group were the antithesis of Ethan's opulent, sterile world. Located in a historic building in the meatpacking district, the space was warm and inviting, with exposed brick walls, comfortable leather armchairs, and shelves overflowing with books, not just on law, but on history, philosophy, and art. It was a space designed for people, not for posturing. Stella Martinez herself was a force of nature. She was a petite woman in her late 40s, with intelligent, piercing dark eyes that seemed to see right through you. She wore a stylish, impeccably tailored pantsuit, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek chignon. She exuded an aura of calm, controlled power that was both intimidating and deeply reassuring. She listened to Esther's story without interruption, her expression unreadable. She didn't take notes, but Esther had the distinct impression that she was committing every single word, every nuance, every pained inflection to memory. When Esther finally finished, her voice raw from recounting the cruelty of Ethan's words, Stella leaned forward, her gaze softening with a hint of empathy. Esther, she said, her voice calm and measured, thank you for trusting me with this. I know how difficult that must have been. She paused, letting the silence hang in the air for a moment. Let me be very clear. What your husband has said to you is not just cruel, it is legally significant. His claim that the child is not biologically enough for him after he consented to and participated in the IVF process is not only morally reprehensible, but it also demonstrates a fundamental rejection of his parental responsibilities. We can and we will use that against him. A wave of relief washed over Esther, so potent it almost made her dizzy. For the first time since the confrontation with Ethan, she felt like she wasn't alone. She had an ally, a champion. "What do we do now?" Esther asked, her voice barely a whisper. Stella's expression shifted, the empathy replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. "Now we go on the offensive. A man like Ethan Caldwell, a man with his ego and resources, will expect you to be weak, to be emotional, to make mistakes. We will do the opposite. We will be strategic, methodical, and relentless." She stood up and began to pace the room, her energy filling the space. "First, we need to secure your financial independence. As of this moment, you will no longer use any credit cards or accounts linked to him. I have a forensic accountant on my team, a man who is a positive bloodhound. He will trace every dollar Ethan has ever tried to hide. We will find out his true net worth, not the sanitized version he shows the IRS. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at Esther. "Second, you need to move out of that penthouse. It is his territory. It is a symbol of his control over you. I have already taken the liberty of arranging a secure private residence for you. It's a beautiful brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, fully furnished. The lease is in a corporate name. He won't be able to find you." Esther's eyes widened. Stella had already done this. "But my things—" "My team will handle it," Stella said dismissively. "They will pack and move everything you want while you are safely settled elsewhere. You will not have to see him or speak to him again. From this moment on, all communication goes through me." The sheer efficiency, the proactive power was breathtaking. Esther felt a surge of strength, borrowing it from the formidable woman in front of her. "Third, and most importantly," Stella continued, her eyes locking onto Esther's, "we need to gather evidence. Your husband's words, his actions. They paint a picture of a man who is not fit to be a father. A man who sees a child as a commodity, an extension of his own ego. His obsession with his bloodline, his rejection of this child before it is even born. This is powerful ammunition." Over the next few weeks, Stella and her team built a fortress around Esther. The forensic accountant, a rumpled, unassuming man named David Chen, began to dig into Ethan's labyrinthine finances. He uncovered offshore accounts, shell corporations, and a pattern of financial deception that was as audacious as it was illegal. Ethan wasn't just a millionaire. He was worth hundreds of millions more than he publicly admitted. Meanwhile, Stella's chief investigator, a former NYPD detective named Frank Miller, began to discreetly interview former employees of Ethan's company, disgruntled business partners, and even some of the domestic staff from the penthouse. A dark, disturbing portrait of Ethan Caldwell began to emerge. He was a ruthless businessman, known for his vindictive nature and his explosive temper. There were stories of him verbally abusing employees, of making threats, of a deep-seated misogyny that he usually kept hidden behind a veneer of charm. Frank also uncovered something else, a secret that Ethan had guarded for his entire life. Ethan himself was not the product of a long, distinguished Caldwell bloodline, as he so often claimed. His own father had been a struggling immigrant who had changed his name and fabricated a more impressive family history to assimilate and get ahead in the business world. Ethan's entire identity, his obsession with legacy and bloodlines, was built on a foundation of lies. Stella presented this information to Esther in a calm, factual manner, but Esther could see the glint of triumph in her lawyer's eyes. "This is it," Stella said, tapping the file on her desk. "This is the key. His hypocrisy is staggering. He rejected you and your unborn child for not being biologically enough when his own identity is a complete fabrication. We can use this to destroy his credibility, to expose him for the fraud that he is." The legal battle began in earnest. Ethan's lawyers, a high-powered, expensive team from a white-shoe law firm, were arrogant and dismissive at first. They filed a motion demanding joint custody, portraying Esther as an unstable, emotional woman who was trying to alienate a loving, devoted father from his unborn child. They painted Ethan as a pillar of the community, a philanthropist, a man desperate to be a part of his child's life. But Stella was ready for them. In her response to their motion, she didn't just refute their claims, she annihilated them. She attached a sworn affidavit from Esther, detailing Ethan's cruel words, his controlling behavior, his rejection of the baby. She included a preliminary report from the forensic accountant hinting at the vast hidden wealth and financial impropriety. And she included a chillingly effective psychological evaluation of Ethan, conducted by a renowned forensic psychologist, who, based on the evidence provided, described him as having narcissistic personality disorder, with a dangerous obsession with eugenics and legacy. The masterstroke, however, was a single devastating sentence in the final paragraph of the motion. It read, "Furthermore, Mr. Caldwell's obsession with a pure bloodline is particularly noteworthy given the extensive evidence we have uncovered regarding the complete fabrication of his own family history and pedigree." It was a shot across the bow, a clear signal that they knew his deepest, darkest secret. The effect was immediate. The tone of the opposing counsel's letters changed from arrogant to panicked. They requested a settlement conference. The conference was held in a neutral, soulless conference room in a downtown office building. Ethan was there, looking pale and drawn. He refused to look at Esther. His jaw clenched so tight a muscle ticked in his cheek. He had lost weight, and his expensive suit seemed to hang off his frame. His lead lawyer, a portly man named Arthur Vance, blustered and postured. "My client is a respected businessman. This is a shakedown. He only wants what's best for his child." Stella let him talk her face a mask of polite indifference. When he had finally run out of steam, she leaned forward and spoke, her voice quiet, but carrying the weight of steel. "Let's stop wasting each other's time, Arthur," she said. "Your client is a liar and a fraud. He has emotionally abused his pregnant wife. He has rejected his unborn child in the most visceral and disgusting terms. He has hidden tens of millions of dollars in offshore accounts, and his entire life is based on a lie about his own heritage. A lie that, if it were to be made public, would not only humiliate him, but could also have serious repercussions for his business. The press would have a field day with this story. Millionaire mogul's fake family tree. I can see the headlines now." She paused, letting the threat hang in the air. "So here is our offer. It is not a negotiation. It is a statement of fact. Mr. Caldwell will relinquish all parental rights to this child. He will have no contact, no visitation, no say in the child's upbringing ever. His name will not be on the birth certificate. In return for his complete and total disappearance from their lives, we will agree to a confidentiality clause regarding his fictional ancestry." Vance and his team were speechless. Ethan's face was a mottled shade of red and white. He looked like he was going to explode. "This is blackmail," he hissed, finally looking at Esther. His eyes filled with a venomous hatred. Stella didn't flinch. "No, Ethan," she said, using his first name for the first time, her voice dripping with contempt. "This is a consequence. You made your choice when you told your wife that she and the baby she is carrying were not good enough for you. You don't get to choose again." Ethan stood up so abruptly that his chair scraped loudly against the floor. He glared at Esther, a silent promise of revenge in his eyes, before storming out of the room, his lawyers scrambling to follow him. The room was silent. Esther looked at Stella, her heart pounding. "Will he take it?" Stella smiled a slow, confident smile. "Oh yes," she said. "He'll fight, he'll posture, he'll threaten. But in the end, his ego is more important to him than anything else. He will choose to save his reputation over a child he has already rejected. He's a coward, and we've got him cornered." Stella was right. The next few weeks were filled with angry letters and threats of protracted court battles from Ethan's legal team. But it was all bluster. They knew they were beaten. They knew that Stella had them, and more importantly, she had the truth on her side. Esther, meanwhile, settled into her new life in Brooklyn Heights. The quiet, tree-lined streets were a world away from the cold glamour of Fifth Avenue. She began to heal, to breathe again. She decorated the nursery not in navy blue and grey, but in warm, sunny yellows and soft greens. She bought more stuffed animals, including a whole family of ducks. She was creating a home, a sanctuary for her and her baby, a place where they would be safe, loved, and above all, enough. The battle was almost won. The future was hers to write. The call came in the pre-dawn hours of a crisp October morning. Esther's water had broken. The months of legal warfare, of fear and uncertainty melted away in an instant, replaced by a singular, urgent focus. Stella had, of course, prepared for this moment with military precision. A private car was waiting downstairs within minutes. There was no chaotic rush to the hospital, no panicked phone calls. Everything was calm, controlled, and secure. Esther had chosen a small private hospital in a quiet part of the city, a place where Ethan's name and influence meant nothing. Stella had already vetted their security protocols and ensured the staff understood the need for absolute discretion. The labor was long and arduous, a physical manifestation of the emotional battle she had endured for the past year. But Esther was no longer the fragile, uncertain woman who had walked into Stella's office. She was a warrior. With every contraction, she drew on a deep well of strength she never knew she possessed. She wasn't just birthing a baby. She was birthing a new version of herself. At 3:17 p.m. After 14 hours of labor, Amelia Rose Rossi was born. She was perfect. She had a full head of dark hair, just like Esther's, and tiny, delicate features. As the nurse placed the warm, squirming bundle on her chest, Esther looked into her daughter's brand-new eyes and felt a love so fierce, so overwhelming, it eclipsed everything else. This tiny, perfect human was hers. She was worth every tear, every fight, every moment of fear. She was more than enough. Stella arrived a few hours later, her usual sharp business attire replaced by a soft cashmere sweater. She carried a ridiculously large bouquet of white roses. Her professional demeanor softened as she looked at Amelia, nestled in Esther's arms. "She's beautiful, Esther," she said, her voice filled with genuine warmth. "Absolutely beautiful." "Thank you, Stella," Esther whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything." "We're not quite done yet," Stella said, her expression shifting back to one of focused determination. "But we're in the final stretch." The peace of the hospital room was shattered the next morning. A nurse came in, her face pale and flustered. "Her Mrs. Caldwell. I mean, Ms. Rossi," she stammered. "There's a man downstairs. A Mr. Caldwell. He's demanding to see you. He says he's the baby's father. Esther's blood ran cold. The bubble of peace and joy she had been living in for the past 24 hours burst. He had found her. Before she could even panic, Stella, who had been on a call in the corner of the room, stepped forward. She took the phone from the nurse. "This is Stella Martinez, Ms. Rossi's attorney," she said, her voice dropping to a glacial temperature. "You will inform Mr. Caldwell that he is not welcome here. He has no parental rights. If he does not leave the premises immediately, I will have him arrested for trespassing and harassment. Is that understood?" There was a muffled squawk on the other end of the line. Stella listened for a moment, her eyes like flint. "I don't care if he's the King of England. He is not setting foot on this floor. Alert your security team. I am on my way down." She hung up and turned to Esther. "Don't you worry about a thing," she said, her voice firm and reassuring. "You stay here and focus on your beautiful daughter. I will handle this." Stella swept out of the room, a whirlwind of controlled fury. Down in the lobby, Ethan was causing a scene. He was shouting at the security guards, his face red with anger, his usual impeccable composure completely gone. He looked willed desperate. "I am the father. I have a right to see my child," he roared, jabbing his finger at the stoic security chief. "Mr. Caldwell." Stella's voice cut through the commotion like a shard of glass. The entire lobby fell silent. Ethan spun around, his eyes locking on her. For a moment he seemed to shrink, the bluster draining out of him. He had underestimated this woman, and he knew it. "Martinez," he snarled. "Where is she? Where is my son?" "First of all," Stella said, walking slowly towards him, her heels clicking ominously on the polished floor. "The baby is a girl. A beautiful, healthy girl. But I wouldn't expect you to care about such details. Second, she is not your child. You surrendered that right when you signed the agreement. Just the week before, after a final desperate attempt to fight, Ethan had caved. Faced with the undeniable evidence of his financial crimes and the public humiliation of his fabricated ancestry, he had signed the legal documents Stella's team had drafted. He had, in the cold black-and-white language of the law, relinquished all parental rights in exchange for a non-disclosure agreement. It was a deal with the devil, and he had signed it to save himself. That was under duress, he spat. "You blackmailed me." "Did I?" Stella replied, raising a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Or did I simply present you with the consequences of your own actions? You had a choice, Ethan. You could have chosen to be a father. You could have embraced this child, regardless of her genetic makeup. But you didn't. You chose your pride. You chose your secrets. You chose your money. You don't get to choose again." She stopped directly in front of him, close enough that he could see the absolute conviction in her eyes. "This is your only warning. If you ever come near Esther or her daughter again, I will not hesitate to make every single one of your dirty little secrets public. The financial fraud, the shell corporations, the lies about your family. I will personally deliver the files to the New York Times and the SEC. Your empire will crumble. Your reputation will be in ashes, and you will be left with nothing. Do you understand me?" Ethan stared at her, his chest heaving. He was a cornered animal lashing out in a last desperate bid for dominance. But he was no match for Stella Martinez. He saw in her eyes not a threat, but a promise. He looked past her towards the elevators, as if he could somehow see through them to the room where Esther and his daughter were. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. Was it regret, pain, or just the fury of a narcissist who had been denied what he believed was his? Without another word, he turned and stalked out of the hospital, the automatic doors sliding shut behind him like the final closing of a chapter. Stella watched him go, her expression unyielding. Then she took out her phone and made a call. "Frank," she said. He showed up. "I want a restraining order in place by noon, and I want round-the-clock security on Esther's home starting now. He's lost, and that makes him unpredictable. We take no chances." When Stella returned to the room, Esther was holding Amelia close, her body still trembling slightly. Stella walked over and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "It's over," she said softly. "He's gone." Tears of relief streamed down Esther's face. "Will he come back?" "He might try to," Stella admitted. "But he will never get close to you or Amelia again. I promise you that. We have built a wall around you that he will never be able to penetrate. He has no legal rights. He has no power here. This is your life now, your story. He is nothing more than a ghost." Looking down at her daughter at the tiny, trusting face, Esther knew that Stella was right. The ghost of Ethan Caldwell would haunt the periphery of her life, a reminder of the pain and betrayal she had endured. But he would never touch her again. He would never get to hold this precious child, never get to see her smile, never get to be her father. He had made his choice. He had said she wasn't enough. But as she held her daughter, her Amelia, her Rose, she knew the truth. She was everything, and he had lost it all. The victory wasn't just legal. It was absolute. He had been erased. The first year of Amelia's life unfolded not as a recovery, but as a renaissance. Esther, now unbound from the suffocating weight of her marriage and the chilling echo of Ethan's judgment, experienced a blossoming she hadn't realized was possible. The Brooklyn brownstone, once chosen as a tactical safe house by Stella, had absorbed their joy and transformed into a genuine home. It was a place of profound and deliberate peace. Sunlight, unfiltered by the tinted floor-to-ceiling glass of her former life, streamed into rooms filled with the scent of lavender baby powder, freshly brewed coffee, and the faint, pleasant aroma of oil paints. The silence was no longer a void of unspoken resentment, but a comfortable quiet punctuated by Amelia's happy gurgles, the rustle of leaves in their small backyard, and the vibrant music, jazz, classical folk that Esther played throughout the day. She was not just healing. She was creating not only on the canvases that now lined her home studio, but in the very atmosphere of the life she was building. True to her word, Stella Martinez had constructed an impenetrable fortress around them, built not of bricks and mortar, but of legal precedent and unwavering vigilance. The restraining order was granted swiftly, a permanent black-and-white decree that Ethan Caldwell was a non-entity in their lives. The security detail was a masterclass in subtlety. There were no looming bodyguards in black suits. Instead, there was a quiet, unassuming man named Marcus, a former Secret Service agent with kind eyes and an uncanny ability to be both ever-present and completely invisible. He would nod politely as Esther left with the stroller, and she would return hours later to find him seemingly reading a book in his parked car, though she knew he had tracked her every move, ensuring their safety without ever intruding on their freedom. Ethan, a man accustomed to getting everything he wanted, could not comprehend a world where his power was meaningless. In the early months, he made a few desperate, pathetic attempts to breach the wall. A van from a high-end children's boutique arrived one afternoon, attempting to deliver an absurd collection of gifts, a diamond-encrusted rattle from Tiffany's that was more weapon than toy, a miniature custom-built Bentley car, a wardrobe of designer baby clothes that cost more than a year of college tuition. Marcus intercepted the delivery, and 2 days later every item was couriered back to Ethan's office. Tucked inside the box with the ridiculous rattle was a single sheet of Stella's official letterhead. It contained one terse final sentence: "Further attempts to initiate contact will be considered a direct violation of the court order and will be met with immediate legal action." His next attempt was to manipulate their old social world. He tried to get information through former mutual acquaintances, only to find those doors slammed shut. The story, in its carefully controlled essence, had permeated their elite circle. While the specific details of his fabricated ancestry remained confidential, the core truth that he had viciously rejected his wife and unborn child had made him a pariah. No one wanted to be sullied by that kind of cruelty. He was a social leper. A business associate later told a friend, who told a friend who eventually told Esther, that they had seen Ethan at a charity gala he once would have dominated. He stood alone, nursing a whiskey, his eyes scanning the room with a mixture of arrogance and paranoia, a king deposed haunting the halls of a kingdom that no longer recognized his rule. His empire, built on a foundation of ruthless deals and carefully managed perception, began to fray. Without Esther as his social anchor and public humanizer, his abrasive nature came to the forefront. Trust eroded, deals faltered, and the ghost of his past, a past he had tried so hard to bury, seemed to poison his present. The name Ethan Caldwell, once a symbol of success, was now whispered with a mixture of pity and contempt. He was a man drowning in the gilded cage he had so proudly constructed. Esther, meanwhile, was building her own empire, one not of concrete and steel, but of color, texture, love, and resilience. She poured her newfound energy into her first passion. She leased a small, light-filled space in her neighborhood and opened the Rossi Gallery. It was dedicated to championing emerging female artists, women whose voices like hers had been quieted for too long. The gallery's opening night was a resounding success. The space was packed with a vibrant mix of Brooklyn locals, art critics, her new circle of friends, and her own family, who had flown in for the occasion. Her father, a warm, boisterous man, whom Ethan had always treated with thinly veiled disdain, stood with tears in his eyes. "Look what you've built, Esther," he said, his voice thick with pride. "All by yourself." In that moment, surrounded by brilliant art and genuine love, Esther felt a sense of accomplishment that no lavish gift from Ethan had ever come close to evoking. She was no longer a beautiful accessory to a powerful man. She was the powerful woman. On Amelia's first birthday, Esther hosted a party in their sun-drenched backyard. It was the antithesis of the stuffy, ostentatious events of her past life. A simple white tent was adorned with strings of fairy lights. Wildflowers sat in jam jars on wooden tables, and the air was filled with the laughter of a dozen children. Her new friends, women she'd met at the park and in her Mommy and Me yoga class, were there along with her siblings and parents. Stella Martinez also came not as a lawyer, but as a friend. She sat on the grass, her sharp, legal mind seemingly on pause as she bounced a giggling, cake-smeared Amelia on her knee. Esther watched the scene from the doorway of her kitchen, a glass of lemonade in her hand. She saw her mother laughing with a friend. She saw her father pushing a child on a swing. She saw Stella, her warrior, looking at Amelia with pure, unguarded affection. This was her legacy. Not a fabricated bloodline or a cold corporate name, but this circle of warmth, this tapestry of love she had woven from the threads of her broken heart. She thought back to that terrible day, to the 6 words that had been meant to destroy her. "You're not biologically enough for me." Ethan, in his arrogance, had believed that biology was the ultimate measure of worth. He thought legacy was something passed down through blood. He was so profoundly wrong. Legacy was this. It was the strength a mother shows her daughter. It was the community you build. It was the joy you create in the face of pain. She had carried Amelia. She had birthed her. She had nourished her. And she was raising her in a world of unconditional love. She was not just biologically enough. She was everything. Later that evening, long after the last guest had departed and Amelia was sleeping soundly in her crib upstairs, Esther walked into her studio. The scent of turpentine and linseed oil was a comforting balm. She stood before a large blank canvas, her mind quiet and clear. The pain of Ethan's betrayal was no longer a gaping wound, but a faded scar, a reminder of a battle fought and won. It was the darkness that had forced her to find her own light. She picked up a brush, no longer with the hesitation of someone relearning a forgotten skill, but with the confidence of a master. She didn't just make a single stroke of yellow. She began to paint with purpose and passion. She mixed deep, stormy blues and greys, representing the cage she had escaped, but then began to overwhelm them with brilliant strokes of sunrise yellow, vibrant magenta, and the soft, hopeful green of new leaves. It was an abstract, a story of her soul. She was the architect of this new life, the artist of her own masterpiece. And it was brilliant, chaotic, and beautiful. She had not only survived, she had triumphed not by destroying the man who had wronged her, but by building a world so full of light and love that his darkness could never hope to penetrate it again. She was free, and in the quiet of her home, surrounded by her art and the gentle, rhythmic breathing of the child who was her whole world, she knew she had everything she would ever need. The story of Esther and Ethan is a shocking reminder that wealth and power can't buy humanity. It's a story about the ultimate betrayal and the incredible strength of a mother's love. Esther's journey from a heartbroken wife to a fierce protector of her child is an inspiration to anyone who has ever been made to feel like they are not enough. If her story moved you, please give this video a like to show your support for her courage. Share it with your friends to spread this powerful message of resilience. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next real-life story of drama, justice, and survival. Thank you for listening.